Rishad Tobaccowala, renowned advisor and thought leader in marketing and business transformation, also author of the new book, Rethinking Work, joins Jeff and I to discuss the future of work in an AI-driven world, how AI is reshaping the advertising industry, and what it takes for organizations to thrive amid rapid change. That's coming up next on AI Inside. This is AI Inside, episode 78, recorded June 27th for Saturday, July 5th, 2025. Rethinking Work with Rishad Tobaccowala. This episode of AI Inside is made possible by our wonderful patrons at patreon.com/AI Inside Show. If you like what you hear, head on over and support us directly. And thank you for making independent podcasting possible. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the AI Inside podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jason Howell. Jeff is here, but he's on the other side of this little intro for our interview. This is a special weekend edition interview with Rishad Tobaccowala, who is formerly chief strategist at Publicis Group. There, he helped pioneer digital and data-driven advertising. He's an accomplished author. He actually has a new book called Rethinking Work, where he takes a look at how technology, flexibility, and meaning are reshaping the modern workplace. Rishad and Jeff actually have known each other for quite some time now, so I'm grateful to have the chance to use that connection to bring Rishad to the show, to all of you, to discuss a number of the topics that Jeff and I have been batting around in recent weeks on the show. So why don't we get right to it? Here's our conversation with Rishad Tobaccowala. Rishad Tobaccowala, author of Rethinking Work and so many other things that we're going to talk about today. Rishad, it's a pleasure to get you on the show today. Thank you.
It's great to be on the show. And, thank you, the two J's, I guess, Jason and Jeff.
That's right. That's what people should really think of us as, right. The two J's of AI.
Yes.
Rishad, your presence on this show kind of comes from a conversation that Jeff and I had of not very long ago, a handful of weeks ago, when we were talking about Meta and Mark Zuckerberg's kind of vision for Meta's approach to its ad market and how it approaches ads, fully ad driven from creation to management. And we got to kind of, postulating and kind of wondering what the future looks like for the ad industry with these AI tools. And you're the perfect person to talk about this. You've kind of written about the future of work with Rethinking Work, your new book that came out in February. And so maybe let's start there. What have you seen when it comes to the ad industry, especially this evolution from the early days to where we are today in this kind of AI-driven landscape? What are the changes that you see coming to how advertising is run, how it's delivered, all those things?
What we've lived through, obviously, advertising's been around since cave painting. But if you sort of think about it, I'm going to sort of ground advertising in three connected ages. So the first connected age, for all practical purposes, began in 1993 with the World Wide Web. Now, obviously, there was things like America Online and CompuServe and stuff like Jeff and I in our dinosaur days used to use. But online was around. But true, internet was 1993 with the World Wide Web. And in that first era between 1993 and 2007, we basically, humans basically connected to discover and they connected to transact, because those are the two things that could be done, right? And the discovery company in the US was called Google, and the transaction engine was called Amazon. But what it was really doing, and a lot of people said, okay, agencies are going to go to hell in a handbasket. But search, which was the way advertising or Google made still 85 to 90% of its money, turned it out to be an advertising-driven business. However, it was a slightly different advertising business in the fact that it was primarily and continues to be a small and medium business, advertising business. So 80%, 90% of the revenues of someone like a Google actually comes from small and medium businesses. Because there's people who either weren't advertising or advertising in classifieds or things like that. So that was the first. Then in 2007, we entered the second connected age, which built on the first, did not replace, but built. And now, in addition to connecting to transact and connecting to discover, we were now connecting all the time, connecting to everybody and connecting to distraction. And what we call that is social, mobile, and streaming, which also big names are Apple and Netflix slash YouTube and Meta, right? So these are some of the most valuable companies. And I kept telling people that these are actually human connection companies enabled by technology. Now we've entered the third connected age. All of those still exist, right? And in that, there were certain things. About 5 years ago, I said, as these connected ages move, I wrote a piece called "Ruptures in the Mediascape," and this was 5 years ago. And I said the things that are going to grow really big are going to basically be TikTok, which actually happened in the last 5 years. Meta is going to figure out a way around Apple's ATT, the whole privacy thing, which they did, and their stock is basically back. That the individual is going to be more empowered, and we're going to see a lot of influencer media, which has happened in broad way with. I said, watch out for podcasts and Substacks. And not that they were new; they've still been around, but they were starting to grow at an inflection point. And out-of-home media would continue to be very big because it was one of the only traditional medias which technology actually helped. Because A, you couldn't avoid it, and B, a screen could now be out there. It was like so that was going on, and then we've now entered the third connected age. So all of that's still going on. And the third connected age has 4 new types of connection. One is, and these are not as beautiful as the previous ones because I can't describe them as nice as the other ones, but it's connections, but I haven't even shared it's human yet. One is data connecting to data, which is the way I describe AI. So AI to me is applied statistics on steroids. Okay. And I'm a math major. We were doing statistics. And I said, you saw early indications of this with, if you buy this, you can also buy this when you check out on Amazon and all of those things. So there was data connecting data. Second is much faster connections. And even though it's not a big deal yet in the United States, you see this happening in parts of China, which is real 5G. So real 5G is 3 and 4 gigs, which is twice as fast as, or 3 times faster than my Google fiber, right? We have fake 5G in the United States. But the reason why real 5G is needed at some particular stage, regardless of how much we process on our phones, we're going to be processing a lot in the cloud. And if you want to do real time, real 5G allows them to basically do remote surgery in China that they don't do in the United States. Mm-hmm. They don't have real 5G. But people don't pay attention to that. Third is new ways of connecting. And right now, I basically look at those as augmented reality, virtual reality, etc. Mm-hmm. Now, I happen to be one of those crazy people who both can afford, and I'm a fan of the Apple Vision Pro. I understand all the indications. I think it's the future of movies, right? And it's the future of TV. It's more than anything else. It's a very expensive future of TV, but to a great extent, I take it with me everywhere I go, but I don't put it on my face, like on my long plane rides or when I go visit my daughters. I prefer that than their TV, right? But it's a damn expensive future of TV. It's $3,000, but that's one indication. But things like Meta Ray-Ban glasses, all of that thing, new ways of connecting. And finally, we are in a world where trust has broken down. And in particular world, in addition to integrity and trust is from a human level, even though it may be somewhat unpopular, I do trust science, and I kind of trust mathematics, and that's blockchain. So I'm not just saying Bitcoin trading, but blockchain, right? Mm-hmm. So some combination of blockchain, AI, new ways of connecting, and 5G is this new era. Now, and each of the previous eras actually grew marketing and advertising services businesses. They changed. There were some losers, and there were people that actually sort of grew. Okay, I was fortunate to work with teams that allowed the company I work for, Publicis, to reinvent itself over the last 10, 12 years to such an extent that I don't have the exact, I could find the numbers, but I don't pay attention to them as much. But basically, between 2006 to 2019, when I was paying attention, and when we stopped measuring some of these things, Publicis business went from 4% digital to 72% digital. Publicis went from no engineers to 18,000 engineers. Right? And so my whole stuff is, what business are you saying went out of business? That business in 2006 is out of business. Okay. But that business, this is a different business. And obviously it has still lots of that. It's a different business. So that's where, in like many, many years ago, I came up with this whole thing, which The Economist today had in their last week's story, where I basically said agencies are not dinosaurs, we're cockroaches. Okay. We sort of scurry around. Nobody.
I told you that Rishad is the most quotable person
right.
in the media business.
So the whole idea is, hey, we're cockroaches. Nobody likes us, but we scurry around.
You can't kill us.
And we can't kill us. We figure out, okay, now what do we do? Right?
Right.
So, but what happens is it's getting harder and harder. And now specifically, we have some really amazing challenges because this next generation, particularly AI, is basically giving me a bit of a headache, and I'm just glad I don't have to solve for this. Okay, it's solvable. Just because I don't know how to solve it doesn't mean it isn't solvable. Because I may be like out of date. But in the previous things we figured out how to solve it, so I think we can solve it. But there are three areas here that give me pause. One is, for instance, whether you like him or not, what our friend Mark Zuckerberg said. And that's what I wrote, and that I think is what Google is going to do, is they're going to go from basically being discovery engines to outcome engines. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're going to basically say, I'm going to deliver the outcome, and let me run all the algorithms and let me play with all the levers. That's, the interview, with Ben Thompson, that's what Mark Zuckerberg said, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, and I was listening to, a podcast, and someone says maybe they'll go, like Google will go from cost per click to, cost per something different, like token. I don't know how that works, but there'll be a different metric, right? And the idea basically is, as long as you can charge a lot. So, right now, today they may be charging hamburger prices, and there may be fewer searches, but there may be, and therefore outcomes, and they could charge A5 Wagyu prices. Prices was so but they are going to increasingly do a lot of what marketing services businesses are going to do. I think that's, and the reason is not because they want to, but because they may have to keep their stock prices up, right? To deliver outcomes. They don't want to go into the services business. That's a useless business, but they want to go to outcomes. So that happens to be one. The second thing that worries me is, despite all what we have said, and despite everybody's best efforts, most service businesses remain service businesses. And service businesses at heart sell butts and seats. They're FTE businesses. And there is no doubt that this reduces, for the current work you're doing, it reduces the number of FTEs you need. Okay? Mm-hmm. Which is one of the reasons why in Silicon Valley, no longer do people talk about how big they are. They talk about revenue per headcount. You're hearing about $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million per headcount. In the business of advertising, if you're lucky, you get $150,000 per headcount. And so what basically begins to happen is, if you begin to save a whole bunch of money and things become cheaper, your ability to charge a high fee, the client says, wait, you charge for 50 hours, but it takes you now 10 hours. Why are you charging me for 50 hours? Right? Now, you can also say, I will come up with new ideas and businesses for the other 40 hours. So it's not like the fallacy of one piece of meat or whatever it is, one lump of work, right? That whole thing. But it's an interesting thing, because my model has been to sell that versus something else. So that is the other issue, which is the whole idea of how do we actually charge? So you've got these people coming with outcome engines. Second is, how do we charge? And the third one, which is something that in your questions you talked about, was this thing called, how are brands built and does creativity matter? Okay. Does a AI version of Jeff Jarvis not require Jeff Jarvis? Okay, I mean, that's basically right. And if in the end this business is about creativity broadly, right? Does it matter? So this is where I see the hope and angle. So one is, because the cockroaches have done things before, I have hopefully that they'll do it, but these are very hard questions. The outcome engine and the FD are really hard. nobody has paid me and I don't know even how to answer it, but I'm sure smart people will figure it out. Okay, but we'll figure that. But it's the creativity one is that the one that I'm basing that the Renaissance will basically be because of two things. It'll be because of creativity, and it will be because of something what I call the continent and world fallacy. So let me explain how this works. Let me talk about the continent and world fallacy. I don't believe there's going to be one outcome engine. I believe there'll be at least a dozen outcome engines in any country. Okay. So yes, Meta will be an outcome engine, but so will Google, and so will TikTok, and so will Walmart Connect and Amazon and companies we haven't heard of, and OpenAI, whatever it is. Okay.
Because they all seem to follow each other.
They all seem to follow each other. And to a great extent, what tends to basically happen is, much to my shock and dismay, because they've increased their prices so much, you've now got advertising on Netflix, which I never thought was going to be possible.
Right. Yeah.
But what happened is Netflix
and Amazon.
And Amazon, right? And so what basically happens is advertising becomes a fuel for their business models. It may not be the only fuel, but it's a big fuel for their business model, right? And because it's so high margin, what people don't realize is that, I may have got this number wrong, but directionally it's correct. About a year ago, Amazon's advertising revenue as part of total revenue was less than 2%. But that I accounted for about 10% of their profits.
And it's bigger than the entire magazine industry's advertising.
Right. And so to such an extent, they now have the CEO, Doug McMillon, talks about advertising, right, on Walmart Connect. So to a great extent, therefore, I expect that commercial underwriting, whether you call it advertising, whatever, something is going to be part of the business model. So there'll be 10 or 12. That helps agencies, because if there's only one or two, a client can go direct. So what I basically have always said, the reason a whole bunch of what we created Publicis' model was, I remember many years ago, I sat with Maurice and I said, listen, all these things are like continents. They're huge, they're big, they're amazing. But our clients have to live in the world. What can we do to help them navigate the world? The continents are there. They're going to basically sell what they have to sell. Can we go across? So that was like, epsilon, across data. Can we go across allocating and delegating? Can we do that? So that's one reason there may be a business of this, for an agent, and you won't be able to do it directly. Because the whole idea is, if I am in this black box, not only am I going to sell the stuff, but I'm also going to do the measurement. I'm going to give you everything. So you're going to have to trust me. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things is, at what stage will they not vertically integrate into the client? That's the other thing I ask clients. Because if somebody basically owns the customer, the creative, the data, does the client only own the factory? And the factory is in China or in the Philippines. So what do you own? So can one of these companies actually, as they grow, vertically integrate into the client business, which, by the way, you might think is very stupid, but it actually happened to a certain extent. The number one advertiser on on Google for many years was Booking.com, and they vertically integrated into travel, right? And Barry Diller, who's no shrinking violet at IAC, said, I don't know what the hell to do with these people. These people are vertically integrated into my business, right? So one is the complexity, the rapid change, the fact that you can't completely trust them will be an agency. But the other hope for me is how brands are built, okay? So I don't think brands are built on utility. Because if that was true, we would just buy Toyota Camrys. There'd be no expensive cars to a great extent. Mm-hmm. Most of us wouldn't wear watches because our phone has a better watch, right? I believe that 70% of human decisions are emotional, and we use numbers to justify what we just did. Mm-hmm. Okay, and what separates, therefore, are things like provenance and integrity and design, right? And desire, and a whole bunch of other things, if that makes sense. And that will require a world of storytelling and creativity, which humans plus machines will do better than machines. So I'm not saying machines won't be involved, but it'll be humans plus machines, right? Just like we figured out Adobe and we figured out a whole bunch of other platforms to figure it out. Now, to that end, what gave me particular hope, and you should take a listen to this, is during Cannes when everybody was talking about what they were, and because I'm pretty pathetic and I don't get invited, so I was sitting at home. So I basically, because I live next to the beach in Chicago, I looked out and said, maybe this is my private Cannes. I see boats. I see Ohio Street Beach. It's pretty sad. So I said, I got to make my own Cannes. It's clearly, and I said, okay, what is everyone talking about? So I was looking at all the, the semaphore updates and LinkedIn, etc. And I said, there's something about AI and creativity that seems to be going on. Everyone's talking about AI and they're talking about creativity. So I decided to call somebody who probably knew this. And I said, who is good at this?
Hey, real quick, I want to butt in here just super quick and thank our patrons because we got to throw them some love. This week's special call out goes to Rick. Thank you, Rick, for your support. Really couldn't do the show without you. And if any of you would like to support the show, well, all you got to do is head over to patreon.com/AI Inside Show, where you can pledge your support. We really appreciate it, and it allows us to continue doing episodes just like this one. All right, time for a super quick break, then back to our continued conversation with Rishad.
I basically talked to Sir John Hegarty of BBH, okay, the big agency who created Levi's and amazing advertising for Levi's and Johnny Walker and Audi. And the reason was because he's actually invests a lot in startups. He has embraced AI. So I wasn't necessarily going to somebody who was in the good old days. We used to work with pencils and stuff like that. This guy actually uses all these tools, right? So to a great extent, I had a conversation with him, and here is what he said, which was mind-blowing. And once you hear this, you'll see why it's different. So he said, okay, he says, Rishad, first he talked about startups and all of that, which I wanted people in the audience to realize this guy he's young in heart. He may be older, right? But here's so he knows what's going on. Okay, that's number one. I asked him about AI. He said it's the most amazing thing in the world. He said, I'm using it a lot. And he says, think about it as a collaborator, not even a tool. But he says the big issue, obviously, is IP rights and copyrights. He says that I don't know. I said that's it's worrying me a lot. He says that's my whole area. But he said it's big, it's huge, all that stuff. That's great. So then I basically said, okay, let's talk about creativity in the age of AI. You seem to be like this creative guy. So let me ask you a question. And he says, I normally answer this question only inside my courses, but I'm going to answer it for free for you. And I basically asked him this. What is creativity? Okay. And this is his answer, right? Because everyone's talking about creativity and AI. So why don't I ask one of the legendaries of creative, what the hell is creativity? So this is the way he answers. He says, Rishad, often people have told me that the greatest art form of all is music. Okay? Because it's global, it moves people, you can listen to it, it works across languages, it beats with blood or whatever it is. It's music. And he says, it is a big art form, but he says, I believe the biggest art form of all is human life. That's how he starts. Okay, I believe the biggest art is human life. And he says, therefore, I believe that creativity is an expression of self. Mm-hmm. Okay? He says, all of us are creative. He said, it's an expression of self. And he said, if you look at creative people, they will often say, I am trying to make, I am trying to say, I am trying to build, they always say, here's what I'm trying to do, right? Right. So when Jeff started Buzz Machine, this is what he was trying to do. Maybe he was trying to incite somebody, but whatever it was, here's what I'm trying, here's what I'm building, here's what I'm creating, here's what I'm making. And he says, all of us humans are that, right? But he says, one of the changes that's going to happen is now all of us are going to be creative directors. We don't need art directors and copywriters because this whole thing is like creative. So it's different, but he says that's the key thing. But he says there are two forms of creativity, Rishad. And not only this is the definition of creativity, which is an expression of self, but there are two forms. He says there's pure creativity and applied creativity. And he says pure creativity is when somebody basically comes up with the first episode of The Simpsons, right? Or comes up as Frank Gehry did with the Bilbao Museum, right? The Guggenheim in Bilbao. He says that's pure creativity. Applied creativity is the next versions of Simpsons. The
iteration.
Staircase, right? The staircase, right? Mm-hmm. And he says human beings are the ones who are going to do pure creativity. But they're going to offer, right? And he says that's where the future of this is. And he says that's eventually how brands get built and a whole bunch of stuff. And then he had an entire also big thing, which is very interesting, which is my counter to Mark Zuckerberg, right? Obviously. And my counter to Mark Zuckerberg is this. Because we had this conversation because we're like really, I mean, he's more seasoned than I am, but I'm not exactly young. And I basically said, can we talk about any brand that is not a personal brand that has been built online? That was the conversation we had, right? Personal brands, Kardashians, whatever, I understand. But has any brand been built online and has actually sustained? And we couldn't come up with any that sustained. There was Dollar Shave Club, it exploded. These direct brands come. And he basically says there is performance and there is persuasion, right? And he says, the biggest mistake, he says, all my startups I invest in, they come to me and they basically say, we're going to do performance stuff online, all data, all measurement. And he says, the idea that you had for the company and the risk you took on the company had no data, right? And now everything you're doing is data driven. And he basically says, I think actually data has become dangerous in the world of marketing. So that was and when I had that conversation,
because it's stifling to the actual human creativity
it is the human,
because you're too driven by the data.
Yeah, and what happens is you eventually just optimize, and his whole stuff is you keep optimizing. He says, and he wrote a piece before it became popular. He wrote this amazing piece how Nike was destroying itself, right? Because Nike basically decided to follow that model. They stopped doing, some of their big advertising. They did direct to consumer sales. They focused on their website and they focused on metrics. And as a result, they lost being involved with the culture. They stopped caring about the runner. They said women and men versus the runner versus the whatever it is. They let people like On and Hoka show up in the stores, right? On and Hoka did not launch online. They showed up in the stores, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I believe the future of marketing is going to be is experience stacks. Right? And agencies will have clients with experience stack. So what's an experience stack? An experience stack has a digital element to it, which is online. It has a virtual element to it, like all these VR, AR things, right? Mm-hmm. It has an immersive element to it. And that immersive element could basically be everything from, digital twins to gaming and, all of that kind of stuff. And then it has a physical element of it, which could be outside, but it could also merge some of these, like the Sphere, in Las Vegas, right? And brands will be built with a combination of all of these. And as a result, the machine bot part of Meta's empire, which will be very powerful, will be a component of the building blocks of all of this. That's my vision.
Rishad, let me. There's so many tracks to go down here. Yeah. By the way, Rishad and I go way back from 2000. I think it's almost 20 years.
And he still talks to me. Just think about it.
He's brilliant. I interviewed Rishad for What Would Google Do? Yeah. And I want to go down the creative track because I have a course at Stony Brook this fall that I wrote in AI and creativity. But I want to step back for a second.
Sure.
That Meta announcement really struck me in two ways, where you're bringing humanity back in, but I want to present a world where the humanity's out. Where in creative, you can create, rather than just A/B tests, you can create A through Z times 1,000 tests, right? That you can create no end of ads to target people, to test with people, and to do things. So that's to the human end. But you also have a world now where I think we're already starting to see that advertising will be driven not to the human, but to their agent.
Yeah, to the bots, etc.
Right. Yeah. Right. So you have this kind of weird machine-to-machine world where you can create unlimited creative, you can target unlimited, you can measure in unlimited ways. And so I think that's a countervailing. I agree with you about where the humanity is going to come in, but there's a countervailing force there, which is entirely mechanized.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's what led us to call you, because that was a whole new world of advertising and marketing.
Yeah. So one of the key things, I've recently updated a thing where I described all of advertising on one slide, or marketing. It's called, Dawn of a New Era. So 5 years ago, I said it's A, B, C, D, E, and here's how this changed. I updated it for saying, okay, now, in addition to the way audience changes, the audience might be agents, right?
Yes.
Etc. So I completely agree with everything that you basically say. And I will then say, but none of that is going to be a competitive advantage to a client.
Right.
Okay. So here's what's basically happened is I truly believe, and this is not necessarily popular, and by the way, I don't have any particular axe to grind. I truly don't believe that companies like Google and Facebook and TikTok are anything but basically massive high margin toll booths for our clients. It's a way to basically take margin from a client to them. Because what they do is you bid against other clients till marginal revenue and marginal cost equal to the same thing. Right? So in this particular world of machine to machine, the reality of it is when somebody tells me that their AI is better than my AI, I said, no, I'm a company of one who is in a good position to actually afford all the big LLMs. I have Claude and I have Gemini and everything else. I pay $180 a month, not just 20. Okay. As a result, I'm using the most recent versions versus 6 months ago, which is twice as good. So I've got better technology than you do. And by the way, I'm accessing exactly the same thing. Yeah. So the reality of it is that if companies believe that they're going to have better bots and better machines, but they're using exactly the same goddamn thing. So you're going to basically say, I'm different, I'm better than you. You don't go running around saying I'm better than you because I use electricity. Now, people like, Jeff, he still lives by candlelight. Jason, you and I, we use electricity, right?
Yeah,
so if we're competing with Jeff, we'll say we can beat Jeff because the guy's reading by candlelight. Okay, but we use electricity. Everyone's going to have the same AI. Everyone's going to have the exact same bots.
Yes.
Right? But at some particular stage, as long as there are humans in this, right, the human has to basically say, who am I going to go get them to find? Right? Like, they're going to tell the bot, I want to do this, but they have to have something. And at some particular stages, whatever the bot decides, it'll become like however much has become commodities and everything else, private label in most categories still is less than 30%, right? With everything that everyone's trying to do. Maybe it's a little higher because of Kirkland at Costco, but it's usually around that, okay, at most places. So I think what that's going to be is like the lower level machination funneling. And in fact, what's going to actually happen, that going back to the creativity, it's going to be much more of the human, right?
So that's the direct response.
That's a
not
direct
branding.
That's not the branding. But what basically happens, and the branding matters, and the branding primarily basically matters because that is what eventually differentiates. Because if it didn't, when people say this whole thing about emotion and logic, I said, here's the key thing. If everything was based on ROI, none of us would be born because the ROI on parenthood sucks. Right? And so the whole idea is I go to marketers and I say, the more you talk about data-driven marketing, the more you're telling me you don't have a job. And I said, by the way, I have an advanced degree in math. I bought data companies. So just take for a second, I actually know something about this space. I think it's extremely necessary, extremely important, but it's not a differentiator. And so what is basically happening is people are saying, I got this thing. But I said, you're not the only person. Every one of your competitors will have exactly the same thing.
Okay, so if a brand is going to differentiate,
Yeah.
I buy that. Brands came along with mass media in the mid 1800s. Mass media is dying or dead.
Yep.
It's gone. So how meaningful then is the universality of a brand?
So
and riff for a second, and I tell you to riff for a second is funny because but on the death of mass media in all of this.
Okay, so without a doubt, mass media has continued to decline, and one of the reasons why the Googles and Metas did well is because they were great reaggregators, right? They reaggregated searches, they reaggregated streams. And one of the things the future will also be conversations, okay, to a great extent. So this is in addition to search and streams or answers and streams. So one of the things that I basically believe is, and this is the thing when I'm getting confused. So the highest rated show on CNN has about 500,000 viewers, right? I recently heard, and I'm assuming this is a true number, from someone very senior at CAA, that they have 200 clients with more than 1 million followers, who actually in a day get they have a humongous number, right? Mm-hmm. And what may actually begin to happen is a new mass media may be being formed, combined with authenticity, which is why you have all this influencer stuff taking off, right? And so to a great extent, could it be that what was mass media was always fringe media, and fringe media was mass media? And what I'm saying is this. Two simple examples. One real example and one just for the fun of it. So a real example is this, which is Goldman Sachs, somebody did a whole thing which said, what is the total number of size of the revenue that goes to the television networks and all of those things, and then all the stuff that goes to the whole influencer ecosystem. And the influencer ecosystem they project will be 10 times the size of this other stuff, which is number one. Second is, I don't know whether it was Pew or Pointer or somebody else, that basically said, in many ways, people think that you trust the New York Times or the Financial Times, right? And obviously, Jeff loves the New York Times. Okay, but to a great extent, but in effect, not necessarily, because you actually trust the influencer, because the influencer has to earn the trust, right? And takes a viewpoint and says, this is who I am, right? This is what I basically believe. You can disagree, but it's not like who is playing what game, right? And obviously, if they're accepting advertising, they also have to show it. But so that's the second one. So here's a key. I, every Sunday, write a free thought letter. So I don't, right? I was, the other days, and it has 30,000 subscribers with like a 45% open rate. So on any given day, let's say I got 12, 15,000 people. And then because of LinkedIn, et cetera, I get more people. So I went through some of the thing and I said, how many senior people do I have? Right? And out of the 30,000, I would say I probably have 2,500 people who are CMOs, CEOs, CFOs. I would hypothesize, and they read me every week. They're open all the time, right? I would hypothesize that this horrible one-person self-employed company reaches more of those people than Ad Age and Adweek. Those particular people on a weekly basis, right? And so one of the key things is it could be that brands working closely, and right now, obviously, now the reverse has happened, as you know, these famous people are making their own brands, right? Which is they're using their authenticity. These people have become media brands, especially in beauty. That's why all these companies are buying these things. So it's almost like you can imagine Jeff launching a brand because Jeff is a major media company. Right? So what may happen is brands might be built in a different way today to a certain extent, and maybe built in a different way. It may come from different ways, and there may be a new type of mass media, right? And the new type of mass media may be reaggregated people. And some people may obviously he has his own idiosyncrasies, etc. But right now the biggest guy is like Mr. Beast, who has his average things 100 million views, right? And obviously he has his own idiosyncrasies and problems with his hamburger or whatever shit he made. But the whole idea is at some particular stage, let's say it's Jeff, right? And people say Jeff is the real deal, which he is. And for a certain group of people, he is the kind of stuff you like, right? Jeff could build a whole bunch of stuff and he becomes a mass media, right? And not just for his own mass media. He shows up on other people's, podcasts. He shows up on other things. So it's a new form of reaggregation that may actually happen with humans. Now, I haven't got all the way down, but I think there's hope.
Hey, it's me again, just butting in, sorry, to say that if you're enjoying this conversation, hey, please leave a review wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, wherever it happens to be. Fresh reviews of the show, I think they're essential in helping get the word out. That and, well, you telling your friends and colleagues about the show. So thank you for doing that. And let's take a quick break, then be back for the final part of our interview with Rishad. What do you see as some of the really smart ways that some of these agencies, advertising agencies, are using AI right now? And I mean, this just really comes from, Jeff and I's conversation about what Meta had been talking about a couple of weeks ago, and just kind of hypothesizing around, man, there is this constant stream of data. There is this rapid turnaround of inference that can come from these models. are we facing a day where everything is hyper personalized because that's what the machine is driving? Sounds like a lot of what you're talking about, though, is that the humanity isn't fully removed from this and won't be fully removed.
The humanity isn't fully removed. Now, one of the things some of the stuff I write on the edges, like 5 years ago, people said, okay, this is speculative. It all happened. So there may be a couple of things where it says, okay, the guy clearly has lost his minds already. And so I said, personalization is actually going to be replaced by something more important. And that's anticipation.
Knowing what you want before you know you want it.
Yeah. And that is going to be a combination of desire and data.
Yeah.
You don't anticipate your space. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I feel like that's been a promise for a very long time.
Right.
At least, I operate so deeply in the smartphone world, and how many years have they been trying to do that?
But the reason we couldn't do it because we didn't have these AI breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we basically could. Now,
because it was too much data or too little data?
There was too little data and not enough processing power, and then not enough ways to actually tell the story. So, see, one of my basic beliefs, and I might be wrong, one of my lines, besides cockroaches, which is now coming true, is I said too much of the advertising and marketing business was fixated on the plumbing versus the poetry, right? Which is finding the right person at the right place at the right time. But then we basically gave them the same old message. It's like, temperature is different here, color is different, right? And it's the equivalent of me taking my wife to Venice on a gondola on a moonlit night and then talking to her about contract plumbing or something like that. She'd kick me out. So my old stuff is if you find the right person, the right place, the right time, and you don't have the most appropriate message, you're hurting the brand, right? But the other one is brands tend to basically build one step ahead. They don't just react. Like the biggest brands always do something that is in the human condition, but it's one step ahead, which is the anticipation. So part
setting the trend, not following the trend.
Yeah. And so part of the research and data that all of this does is people are using it. So how are smart companies using it? One is obviously they're using it to get the plumbing better, the whole underlying architecture, finding the right person, the right place, the right time. Obviously, they're doing stuff with like messaging and changing the poetry, the 100 versions and all of that kind of stuff. There's 3 or 4 other ways that they're doing it. A lot of focus groups are being replaced by personas. So they're doing massive thing of trying to understand. That's part of the association. What is persona? They're actually doing it where they basically come up with base creative versions and they take some of their best minds to take it to the next level, right? So like when somebody basically said, I said, look, if I asked a question about aligning with the trend to ChatGPT or anybody else, this is the answer that comes up. Here is one page in my book where I show you what aligning with the trend is. And my aligning with the trend uses Julius Caesar from Shakespeare, take the current when it serves, and Star Wars, may the force be with you. And I said, people remember this versus this shit. Okay. But guess what happened? I first read this shit. I said, okay, got it. I put it aside and I said, now let me make it better, make it more human, make it more interesting. Let me differentiate against the engines, but using the engines, right, as a collaborator and tool. So a lot of people are also going to basically do that in better understanding and anticipating people's needs, right? Better understanding a whole bunch of other stuff. What they're also going to basically do, which I truly basically believe, and I've always basically believed, that at its heart, advertising is both also about the economics of information by letting people know about products and services. Otherwise, how are you going to, right? And I'll give you an idea of when the economics of information stop, what happens. And this is not a very popular, it's not a popular brand, but I'm going to give you something that most people have long forgotten. Until 1998 or 1999, and since 1999, the most valuable brand in the world has been Apple iPhone as a single brand. Apple iPhone is the most valuable brand. Okay. Until 1999, from about 1960s or 1970s to 1999, the most valuable brand in the world was Marlboro cigarettes. Okay, which people don't realize, right? It was the most valuable brand. And how did it get more and more and more valuable? I'll tell you. The reason is because you stopped advertising. So what basically happened is when they began to basically say you could not do advertising on TV and radio. First was like broadcast, right? Most advertising basically was built on jingles, right? A cigarette shirt, et cetera, et cetera. And Marlboro was based on imagery and, Marlboro country, right? Freedom and a whole bunch of other stuff. So what basically happened is everybody else couldn't go into the world of imagery, which these people did. They first went into outdoor, but they went into clothing and ranches and trains because they had an idea that could transfer, right? And all the other market shares went down because nobody could actually beat this. Does that make sense? So when you freeze a market, it basically, to a great extent, it doesn't allow new innovation. It doesn't allow new companies. It doesn't allow, and a big part that I'm always concerned about this, everything becomes all incestuous and everything eats on its own tail, is what many of these models are.
Yes.
Right? And someone has to break through, to that. And that's where I think agencies, marketers will have a hope.
So we're running out of time, but I have one more question for you. We saw in the NBA finals, I think we saw the first supposedly AI created ad. VO3 is pretty impressive now.
Very impressive.
You're down to just 5 fingers instead of 8 or 9.
Yeah.
The strategizing aside and the data aside, just simply the media creation. Do you think we're going to see, and also aside the issues of rights and fears of lawyers, put that aside for now too, not easy to do, but do you think we're going to see a lot of advertising, especially on TV, including primetime TV, whatever the hell that is now, that's going to be fully created out of these AI tools rather than old ways?
I would say that most advertising in 2 to 3 years from now will be 80 to 90% primarily AI tools with human layer. And
not saying that the people in them will be AI generated, but AI tools are involved in some way or fully generated.
It could also be AI people and everything else, but it'll be human beings working with those tools, right? And the reason is the rapid advances in those tools. Yeah. So VO3 is absolutely amazing. So you can sort of imagine VO4 will be even better, right, to a great extent. But one of the biggest things, and this is also, by the way, a challenge for all companies. So in my book, I'm very hopeful about the future, but I have 3 lines which get people all worked up. So I said, what we're going to be seeing now is a great decline in jobs, but a rise of work. And I said, the big mistake people have made is they've associated work and jobs. I stopped having a job 6 years ago. I have lots of work, right? And if you go back all the way to when Jeff and I were young, in agricultural age and all of that, we used to just work from home. We had work. We never had jobs, okay? So that's number one, if you think about it. Second is most of these technologies will create an ecosystem of many, most companies will be much smaller than they are today, much smaller. You've seen peak Microsoft, peak Google, peak in employees, but not revenue or profitability. However, there'll be many more jobs, or not jobs word bird, because there'll be many more companies. In the US, 6 million companies were launched last year, right? Because of the modern technologies. And what I believe that AI is going to be doing creatively is going to be democratizing a whole bunch of stuff. So these things that you couldn't do, just like YouTube and blogs, it allowed people like Jeff. I mean, in the previous time for Jeff needed to do stuff, he had to launch Entertainment Weekly, which isn't so cheap. Yeah. And then he could do Buzz Machine, right? So, and both have a role, but you're sort of seeing. So that's the key thing. So I truly believe that there's going to be a massive new world of creativity. But if you think about human expression with these tools, I always remind people that Gary Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue. But what people don't realize is the sequel. Gary Kasparov and Deep Blue always beat Deep Blue. Right? But on the other hand, in some cases, the human will be completely replaced. So yesterday, I put a cartoon on into LinkedIn, which sort of got people all worked up. And basically, it is a farmer telling a horse, right? The tractor will not replace you, right? You, the horse. the horse using a tractor will be the one replacing the horse. That's what people say. In some cases, the human is going to be replaced. Okay, and just get used to it. And anybody who tells you differently doesn't understand where this technology is going. Great. Which I leave you with that, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
thank you, Rishad.
I miss these moments. Thank you so much.
Wow. Okay, that was information dense. I personally learned so much more when I was editing the show, simply because Rishad covers so much ground in such a condensed amount of time. Hearing it a second time, I was like, all right, I'm following 100%. It's great stuff. Huge thank you to Rishad Tobaccowala for being with us on the show. If you want to find all of our episodes, we have lots of other amazing interviews. Jan LeCun just as one of them. Sal Khan, if you go digging back further, go to AIinside.show. You can find a ton of great interviews that we've had, as well as our news episodes. But the interviews, you can listen to those anytime, and they're always updated and to the point. And finally, if you really, really do love this show, I can't stress it enough. Patreon.com/AIinside show is the best place for you to support this show, other than telling people about it. You get Discord community access, you get ad-free episodes, all of our shows, episodes without any ads in them. You get an AI Inside t-shirt if you become an executive producer, and there are a lot of executive producers right now. Dr. Do, Jeffrey Maricini, WPVM 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina, Dante St. James, Bono De Rick, Jason Neifert, Jason Brady, Anthony Downs. I'm sure you can just imagine me saying your name right there in that list, along with those other amazing names. Thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next Wednesday on another news episode of AI Inside. Bye, everybody.